If some of them are very, like, if we're looking for a specialist in something, maybe we will address you to the other authors. We're very close to the final discussion. I'm very excited to be the last one to talk. Maybe just to give you some food for thought for the next discussion, we decided to use the term domestication. So I can see that the term neolitization, Neolithic, I mean, it's been theme of debate already from the other speakers, so maybe we can also add to the discussion the term domestication. So for the ones who don't know where Sicily is, we are talking about the Mediterranean basin, and we are talking about the center of the Mediterranean basin. As you can see, Sicily is the biggest island of the Mediterranean, and it's literally in the middle of it. So basically, it can be considered a geographical and also cultural bridge in between the northern and southern parts of the Mediterranean and the eastern and western parts. It's also very interesting, for example, in terms of diversity of geomorphology, because we have the coastal hilly areas of the south, we have the mountainous chains of the northern part, we have the Mount Etna, that is volcano in this part, and is up to 3,000 meters. So we also think that Sicily is a very interesting place to see how the spread of domestic plants and domestic animals happen, because it is very varied in terms of ecology and geography. This is just to give you a general paleoclimatic framework. We'll see better later for Sicily how it goes. But as you know, this phase is extremely interesting, because it's the first phase of the Holocene, so things are changing in terms of paleoclimate. What we see in general, not just in Sicily but in the central Mediterranean, is that there is a development of maquis, so of Mediterranean species, especially along the coasts, while in the internal part of Sicily and in general in the internal parts of southern Italy and other regions of central Mediterranean, the deciduous forest keep being the most vegetation, the vegetation is more common in these areas. So what happens in the late Mesolithic? In the late Mesolithic there is this spread both in southern Italy and Sicily of a sort of break from the early Mesolithic tradition. So basically, as you can see, some of the most representing sites for the study of the lithic production, I will tell you later, is Grotta del Luzzo, is this cave that is based in the western part of Sicily. And then for Neolithic, we have some issues in terms of radiocarbon dates. So these are all here on the right, these are the squares, and the circles in black are all the sites that we know for the early Neolithic, but just in terms of cultural chronology, so relative chronology. While of all the sites of Neolithic, basically we just have just 27 sites that are dated. So only the 8% of the sites from Neolithic are actually dated in terms of radiocarbon date. This of course creates a great gap in terms of absolute chronology. If we look just at the sites of the early Neolithic, the first phase, we just have the sites on the western part. So what happens in Sicily? So there are many different possibilities in the spread of Neolithic, of pottery and domestic species. Of course, many authors have already addressed the problem. So basically, Sicily receiving these transformations and these dynamics from southern Italy, are other changes coming directly from, for example, the area of Albania. Some other authors prefer imagining that some of the dynamics are directly coming, for example, from Crete. So let's say that Sicily has been addressed many times as one of the places where Neolithic arrived, but for example, it is less known also for what happens after that domestic species arrive to Sicily. And for sure, one of the key sites is Grotta del Luzzo that I already mentioned. It is on the western part of Sicily, and it is very interesting because it is there is a full data set of carbon-14, and there is a continuity in the occupation from the Mesolithic until an advanced phase of Neolithic, of the ancient Neolithic and also mid-Neolithic. So basically, what is possible to see in the cave is there is this occupation for funerary purposes. It continues during the diverse phases of the Mesolithic and it goes down until the Neolithic. It is also interesting because it was studied also for the genetic purposes. We also have all the data from the bodies that were buried inside the cave. And for the economy, this is what is more relevant to our paper. We can see the changes that happened from the Mesolithic through basically this 2,000 years of occupation. This is the archaeological assemblage. Unfortunately, it is not like fully published, but what we can see is that from a phase where the wild animals are prevailing, as we could expect, then when the Neolithic starts, this is the curve for goat sheep and bowies that increases, and the same we can see in the other trench. And of course, as it has already been said, I think from Professor Gerber before for another paper, the fish resources keep being very high throughout the Neolithic because the site is very close to the sea. And if we look at the lithic production, we can see that there is a continuity from the Castanoria, that is the Mesolithic phase, down through the Neolithic. Basically, we can see that the pressure technique is the same that is used, the presence of the asymmetrical trapezius. We just have some few sporadic elements that can be considered kind of discontinuous from the previous technique, but what we see is basically a continuity. And there is a continuity also in the introduction of crops. So this is the sequence from the Mesolithic phase down to the Middle Neolithic. So what is visible from the archaeological remains is that in the first phase we have a fully Mesolithic hunter-gatherer exploitation of plants. Then there is a first phase of introduction of einkorn and lentils. Then a second phase where new species are introduced like emmer and barley, and then other legumes and naked weeds. So Uzzo is considered to be a sequence that is basically key for the domestication, more than for the domestication of the place, for the expansion of the species, and it shows this sequence that of course should be confirmed also by other sites. If we look at the pottery, we have this first spread of the cardial pottery. If you remember, these are the three early Neolithic first sites. So here, this the full idea of what happens at the end of the 7th millennium in Italy. And then after that, we have the beginning of Sentinello, probably the new ware is coming, the Impressa ware from southern Italy, and a spread occupation of the peninsula. If we look down, so not just to the Italian peninsula, but we also look at what is happening south of Sicily. I told at the beginning that Sicily is a natural bridge in between the northern and southern parts of the Mediterranean. Actually, if we want to be more precise, what is the real land bridge is the islands that are in the Sicilian channel here. There are Pantelleria and Lampedusa that are like natural bridges even today for migration. And we know that in Northern Africa there is the presence of Impressa ware that could be anyway linked also to the spread from the eastern part of Africa. But for sure what is present is the obsidian from Pantelleria. Pantelleria is here, literally in front of Tunisia, and Lampedusa is here. Pantelleria is one of the few obsidian sources. We have Lipari, this is northern Sicily, and we have just the obsidian of Pantelleria in the Sicilian channel and all this area. So basically the communities of these areas are using and exploiting the obsidian of Pantelleria, so it should be definitely well and more studied what is the link between Sicily and Tunisia. Because if we look at Pantelleria, we don't have any early occupation. So we know that it was occupied during the Neolithic, but probably in later phase. So we don't know yet if there are some permanent settlements, especially in the area where some of the Neolithic was found, if there was a permanent settlement already in the early Neolithic phase. What happens at the end of the early Neolithic? So if we move at the second part of the 6th millennium, the second half of the 6th millennium, we see that the Impressa ware keeps being produced. Of course, there are new regional wares spread over the peninsula. We have the beginning of the production of painted ware, probably again with an influence from southern Italy. And especially we start having a system that is occupying also the internal part of Sicily. and a spread and permanent settlement of the small islands around Sicily. This time we have the confirmation by the archaeological remains. So what we think is that it's just in this phase that it starts a real agro-pastoral system all over the island. And such a remote place like Lampedusa, there is just 20 square kilometers of land in the middle of nothing. Basically, this is the first, we just received this date that comes from some findings that were in the 70s. They found a pit with some materials that are also centinello pottery, so impressa pottery, and they thought it was just a pit, but the new surveys they were doing on the island, they showed that probably there was a bigger spread. This is a polished axe, so probably there was a village. This still needs to be investigated on this second phase of the 6th millennium, but this would help definitely understanding what was the role of these small islands in the movement between north and south. So, in lack of many data from archaeology and archaeobotany, we decided to look at Poland, that, as you know, could help in understanding some of the economic changes, so the changes in the use of the landscape of this millennia. We look at the data coming from these 4 lacustrine sites. One is on the Nebroni Mountains, so it's like it represents a bit the area of the mountains. One is in Pergusa, is this lake in the central, it's a hilly mountainous area. And then we have 2 coastal sites. So basically, comparing them, not just for their deep chronology, but also because of their response, we could try to give some answers of what is going on, and if also there are differences between the inner and the coastal parts of the island. So what we see basically is that after this is the phase of the late Mesolithic, that looks quite different in the trends of the different sequences, so we don't know really why this is happening. Sorry, I forgot to tell. This represents the anthropogenic pollen indicators. The anthropogenic pollen indicators are some selected species that change according to the human influence. So, for example, indicators of pastoralism like rumex, like plantago, like urtica, and of course cereals. So it's a combination of indicators of both agriculture and pastoralism. All along the sequence, all along these 2000 years, most of the anthropogenic pollen indicators, I can tell you, both from the coastal areas and from the mountainous areas, they mostly come from pastoral. It looks like they come from pastoral activity more than from cereal cultivation. And this is the arboreal pollen, so this is a combination, of course, of shrubs and trees. So after this phase, it is a bit more different according to the micro-regional differences. We see that around the 8.2, the trends are quite similar. So we have, for example, in the API, this is a decrease. So it's very clear there is a contraction of occupation in this phase, or anyway, there is a less impact on the area. While, for example, for the arboreal trees, these are the mountainous and inner, so are these 2 sites. They doesn't look very much affected. We see an increase instead, probably due to the partial abandonment of the use of these areas in a way, sort of the population in this phase. And we see that here, actually, there is a decrease, but it is a slight decrease that starts already before. So we know that Sicily goes through a process of Mediterraneization quite early in the Holocene, so probably this is something that is going on already since an earlier phase in terms of like climatic trends. And then we have the passage to the early, to the end, sorry, of the early Neolithic and the beginning of the mid Neolithic. We see here the arboreal pollen that is very low, so probably this is a combination of climatic and anthropogenic factors. And we see at the same time the anthropogenic pollen indicators increasing. So this is moving accordingly. And here it's interesting because this is the mountainous sequence, and here we can see that there is probably quite clear human impact on this decrease. And finally, during the middle of Neolithic 2, we see that here there is a clear increase again in the arboreal pollen, and here we have a decrease in the API. So what we think is that this phase probably corresponds to a decrease in population, and this goes on also in a later phase. So what we can say, if we look at the, not just more in general at the rural Poland, but if we look especially at the deciduous forest, so what is quite clear is that after this phase of this part of the early Mesolithic and early Neolithic, the deciduous forest has a limit that covers all this area, and all the sites that we know so far are actually mostly in the coastal areas or in some more inner areas, but not as close to the forest, but never inside probably the dense wooded areas. While if we see at the end what happens at the end of the early Neolithic and the mid Neolithic is that the population is spread all over, and it coincides with a change in the distribution of the deciduous forest. So probably this is a combination again of climatic and anthropic factors. So, if in a nutshell we want to summarize what we saw, we can say that the first occupation of Western Sicily was probably due to some leapfrog movements, so small groups of people who arrive, because if you think about it, it's the western part, it's let's say the part that is more far from the possible arrival of Neolithization. And they are somehow interacting with the local hunter-gatherers. There is a continuity in the Neolithic production, and we can see that there is not a great impact of the so-called 8.2 KABP events on the environment. Then there is a phase of the diffusion of the impressor, also in the eastern part, and there is the gradual opening of the wooded landscape, and then we have this third we call wave. That is with the arrival of the development of the impressor ware and the arrival of the painted ware. And probably we are speculating, because we need more data of course, that crops are following the same kind of waves, so new crops are arriving with new movements of people, but still they are not considered to be an important part of the diet. So we think that in these 2,000 years, according to the data that we have, crops and more in general agriculture is still not that important as much as probably animals were in the diet. For sure, what we can see is very interesting, because places like Kutso show the interaction between the hunter-gatherers and the Neolithic people arriving. But what is very interesting is then seeing what happens in these other 2,000 years. So before there is a structured agricultural and pastoral landscape, there are 2,000 or even more hundreds of years to this new system and economy to develop and to become structured. And of course, we cannot just rely on one site, on a couple of sites that are anyway, of course, key to understanding some processes, but we really need to improve our research